A Plaguelands Media production.
Hey everyone, this is Hugh from Plaguelands Media bringing you another book review, so cheers. Oh, that's good vodka and orange. Now today, I'm bringing you a book that is really quite disturbing. I didn't think it would be as chilling as it actually turned out to be, and that is Let's Go Play at the Adamses by Mendal W. Johnson. Now, this book was written in the late 70s, I believe. And, yeah, I was informed of this book by another YouTube channel. I believe the name is Criminoli. Go and check him out. He does a lot of book reviews on crime, pulp, and horror books. And this was on one of his disturbing book lists. And I'm like, okay, can't be that bad. Yeah, it is. There will be spoilers. There will be a ton of spoilers in this review. So if you don't want any spoilers, you can stop the video here. Just know that I absolutely love this book. It was fantastic. Didn't go where I expected it to go. It actually went a lot darker. So there you have it. Other than that, we're just going to move right on into the next episode of
Read a fucking book. 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 People.
where do I even begin with this one? First of all, let's take a look at the cover. You can see a woman has been bound and gagged to a chair. And then on the back, we have 5 children, I guess. Some of them are teenagers. Anyway. So the basic plot is there are 2 Addams children. There is Bobby. He is aged, I believe, 13. And his little sister Cindy is aged 10. Their parents are going away for a week. And they hire a babysitter / nanny, this 22-year-old college student called Barbara. Now, the Addams children have friends in the area. It's kind of an isolated little community. And those friends are Diane, who's 17 years old, her younger brother Paul, who is also 13 years old, and John, who is 16 years old. So we have the age difference, but they're all friends and they call themselves the Freedom Five. Now, the book opens with Barbara arriving at the Addams house. It's like this sprawling house on a river. They have another house that's kind of like a tenant house that's dilapidated and no one uses it really. The patriarch is a doctor, and we get a feeling that his son, Bobby, really kind of looks up to him. We get that throughout the story itself. So the story begins with Barbara arriving and, you know, it's a Sunday. She gets off the bus and blah, blah, blah. The parents leave. And then that night, literally chapter 1, Bobby sneaks into her room with chloroform while she's sleeping, chloroforms her, and when she wakes up, she is bound and gagged. And this has been a plan of this group of children, the Freedom Five, they call themselves, because in their minds it's a war against adults and children, and they just wanted to see if they could get away with doing this. So they have Barbara, she's bound and gagged. Now, what's interesting about this book is that you get different perspectives. You get Barbara's perspective, then you get the perspective of John and Diane and Bobby and Paul. Very little of Cindy. I think it's because as a 10-year-old, at the beginning of the book at least, she doesn't really comprehend what's going on. So they've captured Barbara, and so they have a meeting and they set out some rules as to what they need to do. So they need to still cook and clean and do all that kind of a thing. They need to guard Barbara. Someone needs to escort her to the bathroom when she needs it. They need to feed her and blah, blah, blah. So what started out as a game quickly becomes a series of mundane chores for them, and the effect of this, we have an adult in captivity, wears off very, very quickly. Ultimately, it wears off to the point where they start doing things to her, like stripping her naked to humiliate her. Some of them hit her. Paul, who is slightly psychotic, we find out that he has these fits and nightmares and things like that. Paul kind of gently cuts her with a knife. John tries to interfere with her in that way. You know what I'm talking about. The YouTube algorithm will not like if I say the word. Which he kind of does, but ultimately it's like a 16-year-old guy's first time, and he finishes very, very quickly. We get these really interesting character developments. We get a very good look into the character of Diane, who is somewhat of an outcast, and she flips very quickly. It's almost like she's bipolar. We learn that John views Barbara as nothing more than an object. Paul is into torture. Bobby is the most sympathetic to her plight, but ultimately doesn't really do anything. And Cindy, surprisingly, starts to take on the traits of Paul in this, what they call a game. They quickly realize that this isn't going to end well for them, and that they need to find a way to end the game that won't get them into any trouble. And their consensus is to kill her. Now, with this group, they have these meetings and they vote on things. It's almost like a mini democracy. Bobby's the only one that votes not to kill her. The other four, including 10-year-old Cindy, all vote to kill Barbara at the end of the week. Now, at the same time, there's this kind of a subplot about a guy that's been lurking around the house. He's a fruit picker, and they devise this plan to frame him for Barbara's ultimate murder. Barbara finds out that they're going to kill her. She pleads with each one of them in turn, but is ultimately kind of shut down. So, towards the end of the story, they start to enact their plan. They take her to the dilapidated tenant house where they kind of leave her there in the middle of a storm in hopes of luring the picker to the main house, this guy named Cruz, so that they can lull him into a false sense of security and kind of enact their plan. Now, the plan itself is all thought up from Diana, or Diane, whatever. She's the one that comes up with everything, and they all just go along with it. Ultimately, the day of the killing comes. They've convinced Cruz to carry some stuff down to this area near the tenant house from the main house, and in doing so puts his fingerprints on kind of everything. And they also gave him free reign of the main house, so his fingerprints are there anyway. It's at this point we get kind of Barbara's point of view, where she pleads with Bobby, she pleads with John, who ultimately does do the deed with her, and technically it's her first time, so we get her kind of thoughts about what is happening. It's really creepy, really eerie, and very, very disturbing. And finally, she pleads with Diane. Diane comes in the next day after the big storm, bathes her, kind of cleans her up, makes her look presentable because she's malnourished. She's got rope burns on her arms and on her legs, they've really kind of kept her in this awkward position where she literally cannot do anything. Finally, they put her in a sleeping bag and carry her down to where the picker left the stuff, and she realizes at this point, no one's coming to help me. I'm going to die. At least before then, she had a little bit of hope that something would happen, that she could get away, that she could convince them. She said, I'm not going to tell anyone. There's also a kind of a subplot about her roommate at college, this girl named Terry, and she has conversations with Terry in her head while this entire thing is going on. It goes on for 7 days, so it's an entire week of this. They take her down to the gate where the stuff is, and she realizes that this is the end. And Diane says, I'm sorry, if we could make it quick we would, but this is not going to be quick for you. And she realizes, at that point, Barbara realizes that the kids have a fireplace poker in a hot barbecue oven on a hot grill. And the 5 of the kids kind of stand around her and they each take turns doing something with the barbecue poker. Now, Paul goes first because that was what they voted on. And he takes this flaming hot poker and he sticks it through the bottom of her foot. Now, she was an athlete, so this is kind of absolute torture, and she's screaming through this rope gag she now has. And then we get that John does the poker on her breasts. Even Cindy and Bobby and Diane do the poker. And ultimately, Barbara realizes they're getting enjoyment out of her screaming in pain, so she stops. And it's at that point the kids get bored. And they're like, well, this isn't fun anymore. So they strangle her with a rope and they kill her. Now, at the end of the book, in the epilogue, we find out that their plan was all along to kill her and then go after the picker. They enact this plan where Bobby and Cindy are locked in a closet and John goes to free them. And then Bobby and John take their guns because they like hunt, duck and shit like that. And they go out and they find the picker and they kill him. And they're hailed as heroes. And everyone kind of gets off. The Adams come back. The police question the kids. Everyone has their story straight. The picker is blamed for the death of Barbara. Ultimately, the kids are hailed as heroes for killing him. And then we never find out what happens to them. We get a rough idea. They give you some idea of perhaps this happened to Paul, perhaps this happened to Bobby, perhaps this happened to Cindy. But it's never definitive. And then at the very end of the book, we get the impression that Barbara's roommate Terry, who has found out about Barbara's murder, can't handle it. And it's very ambiguous, but the way I read it was she takes her own life at the end. And that is Let's Go Play at the Adamses. I'm not going to say this was a tough read, but it was quite disturbing in parts, quite shocking in parts, and I did not think it would end like that. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was a wonderful book for an old school horror novel. Yeah, not much else to say about this one. I'm glad I read it. Don't want to read it again. So, there you go. Let's Go Play at the Adams by Mendal W. Johnson. Fantastic read if you're into that kind of horror. If you're not, kind of give it a miss, in my opinion. But there you go. So, cheers, everyone. Have a fantastic rest of your day. Stay safe. Like, subscribe, leave a comment. Hit the notification bell. Tell your friends. Get them to like and subscribe as well. Come on. But most importantly, do not torture your babysitter. Go read a fucking book, people.